r/ProRevenge Stepfamily disowned me, so I made them look like kidnappers. The police officer's radio crackled to life as he approached the mansion's front door, and I watched from behind the carefully manicured hedge where I'd been hiding for the past hour. My heart hammered against my ribs as footsteps echoed across the marble entryway inside. This was it. 3 months of planning, 3 months of being treated like I didn't exist, and now Richard was about to get exactly what he deserved. Mr. Blackwood. Police. We need to speak with you about a missing child. I could practically hear Richard's confusion through the thick oak door. Good. Let him sweat. You're probably wondering how I ended up crouched in bushes outside what used to be my own home, orchestrating what would become the most satisfying revenge of my 16-year-old life. Well, buckle up, because this story starts way before today. My mom married Richard Blackwood when I was 14. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags during their whirlwind courtship, but Mom was so happy after years of struggling as a single parent. Richard owned a chain of luxury car dealerships and lived in a neighborhood where the average house cost more than most people make in a lifetime. To a kid who'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week, it seemed like we'd hit the lottery. The first few months were actually decent. Richard played the part of the caring stepfather perfectly, buying me expensive clothes and gadgets, enrolling me in private school with his own kids, Marcus, 17, and Sophie, 15. But the mask started slipping once the honeymoon phase ended and Mom went back to her demanding job in pharmaceutical sales that required frequent travel. It started small. Marcus forgetting to save me dinner when it was his turn to cook. Sophie rolling her eyes whenever I spoke and making comments about how I didn't belong here. Richard stopping mid-conversation whenever I entered a room, like my presence was an unwelcome interruption. The psychological warfare escalated over the next 2 years. They'd make family plans and conveniently forget to include me. Richard bought Marcus a BMW for his 17th birthday and got me nothing, not even a card, for mine. They had inside jokes I was never part of, family traditions I was excluded from, and conversations that died the moment I appeared. But the real kicker. They were smart about it. Whenever Mom was home, they were the picture-perfect family. Richard would ruffle my hair and ask about school. Marcus would joke around with me like we were actual brothers. Sophie would even invite me to watch movies with her. Mom never saw the truth, and the few times I tried to tell her what was really happening, she'd brush it off as normal adjustment issues and remind me how lucky we were to have Richard in our lives. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Mom left for a 2-week business trip to Germany, and within hours of her departure, Richard sat me down for a conversation that changed everything. Listen carefully, he said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. You are not my son. You will never be my son. This is my house, these are my children, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Your mother isn't here to put on a show for, so here's how things are going to work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, Richard was opening his front door to find 2 police officers with very serious expressions, asking about a missing teenager who matched my exact description. A teenager who, according to the report I'd filed 3 hours earlier, had last been seen at this very address under concerning circumstances. The conversation at the front door was muffled, but I could make out enough to know my plan was working. Richard's voice had that tight, controlled quality he used when he was furious but trying to appear calm, the same tone he'd used when he told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and get out. I'm sorry, officers, but I think there's been some mistake, Richard was saying. We don't know any missing children. Sir, we have a report filed by a concerned citizen who spotted a teenager matching this description being forced to leave this residence 3 weeks ago. The witness described what appeared to be a domestic dispute. My stomach lurched with a mixture of excitement and terror. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived across the street and walked her Pomeranian past our house every morning, had been my unwitting accomplice. She'd definitely seen me leaving with my suitcases that day, though she probably had no idea she'd become a key witness in my elaborate scheme. This is ridiculous, Richard snapped, his composure cracking slightly. I demand to know who filed this report. Sir, we need to ask you some questions about your relationship to one Jamie Morrison, age 16. The silence that followed was deafening. I pressed myself deeper into the hedge, ignoring the branches scratching at my jacket. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the moment Richard realized that his biggest mistake hadn't been kicking me out of the house. It had been assuming I was powerless to do anything about it. See, here's what Richard didn't know about those 3 weeks I'd been gone. While he thought I was just another runaway kid who'd eventually crawl back begging for forgiveness, I'd been doing research. Lots of research. I'd been staying with my best friend Tyler and his family, who thought I was just taking a cooling-off period after a family argument. Tyler's dad worked in legal aid, and he'd casually mentioned over dinner one night that stepparents had no legal rights to children they hadn't formally adopted. That conversation had planted a seed that grew into something much bigger. A few careful questions and some digging through Mom's paperwork while she was away revealed the truth. Richard had never legally adopted me. In the eyes of the law, I was just some kid who'd been living in his house. Which meant when he kicked me out, he'd essentially abandoned a minor he'd been housing. And when he refused to let me come back, even going so far as to change the locks and block my phone number, well, that started looking a lot like something Child Protective Services would be very interested in. Officers, I think my stepfather is confused. Marcus's voice joined the conversation, and I could picture him using that charming smile that got him out of trouble with teachers. Jamie's probably just staying with friends. You know how teenagers are. Actually, sir, we need to clarify something, one of the officers replied. According to our records, Mr. Blackwood has no legal guardianship over Jamie Morrison. Which raises some questions about why a minor was residing here and under what circumstances they left. The hedge suddenly felt like it was closing in around me. This was the part of my plan that required perfect timing. I'd filed the missing person report from Tyler's house, claiming I was a concerned friend who hadn't heard from me in weeks. I'd carefully provided just enough details to make it sound credible while painting a picture of a troubled home situation. But now came the tricky part. In exactly 10 minutes, Tyler was supposed to call 911 from a gas station 2 miles away, reporting that he just spotted me looking distressed near Richard's house. I checked my watch. 8 minutes to go. Richard was about to learn that underestimating me had been his biggest mistake yet. The officers stepped inside, and I heard Richard's voice drop to that dangerous whisper he used when he was trying to maintain control. This is harassment. I want to speak to your supervisor. Sir, we're just trying to locate a missing minor. The sooner we can clear this up, the better for everyone involved. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Dude, are you sure about this? My dad's asking questions about where you really are. Shit. This was exactly the kind of complication I'd been dreading. Tyler's father wasn't stupid, and if he started connecting dots between my sudden extended stay at their house and a missing person report filed around the same time, my whole plan would unravel. I quickly typed back, stick to the story. Tell him I'm with my cousin in Portland like we discussed. Another buzz, he wants to call your mom. My blood turned to ice. If Tyler's dad called mom in Germany and she found out I wasn't where I was supposed to be, she'd cut her business trip short and come home to Richard's version of events. He'd spin some story about me being ungrateful and running away, and she'd believe him like she always did. Tell him her phone doesn't work international, I texted frantically. Please. I'll explain everything tonight. From inside the house, I could hear Sophie's voice now, high-pitched and innocent. Officers, we really don't know where Jamie is. There was a big fight with Mom before she left for her trip, and Jamie just left. We thought they were coming back. Clever. She was establishing a narrative that painted me as the problem child who'd run away after arguing with Mom, not Richard. It would explain why they hadn't reported me missing themselves, they were just giving me space to cool off. But Sophie didn't know about the ace up my sleeve. 2 months ago, during one of Mom's previous business trips, I'd overheard Richard on a phone call in his study. He'd been talking to his accountant about tax benefits and mentioned how he'd specifically chosen not to legally adopt me because it would complicate his estate planning with Marcus and Sophie. He wanted to make sure his biological children would inherit everything without any legal complications from that Morrison kid. I'd been devastated at the time, but now that conversation was about to become Richard's worst nightmare. Because it wasn't just about legal guardianship, it was about the paper trail. Every school form, every medical authorization, every legal document that required a parent's signature over the past 2 years had been signed by either Mom or Richard, creating a pattern that suggested he'd been acting as my guardian whether it was legal or not. Mr. Blackwood, one of the officers was saying, we're going to need to see some documentation about Jamie's living situation here. School enrollment forms, that sort of thing. I don't have to show you anything without a warrant. Wrong answer, Richard. The defensive response was exactly what the officers would note in their report. An innocent person would be cooperative, eager to help find a missing child they cared about. My phone rang, nearly giving me a heart attack. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. What's wrong? I whispered, pressing the phone close to my ear. My dad called the police station, Tyler hissed. He told them he has information about the missing kid report. Jake, they're sending someone over here right now. The hedge seemed to spin around me. Tyler's dad had figured it out, which meant the police were about to discover that I wasn't actually missing. I was hiding in my own front yard while orchestrating an elaborate setup of my stepfamily. How long do I have? I asked, my mind racing through contingency plans I should have made weeks ago. Maybe 10 minutes before they get here. Dad's in his office gathering your stuff to prove you've been staying here. 10 minutes. The same amount of time Tyler was supposed to wait before making his fake sighting call. But now instead of that call cementing my plan, the police were about to uncover the truth from an entirely different direction. I had to make a choice, abort the mission and run, or accelerate the timeline and walk into Richard's house right now while the police were still there, before they could learn I'd orchestrated this whole thing. Richard's voice drifted out through the open door. Officers, I think you'll find this is all a misunderstanding. Time to prove him wrong. I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the hedge, my legs shaking as I walked toward the front door. This wasn't how I planned it, but sometimes you have to improvise. The officers' backs were to me as I approached, and I could see Richard's face through the doorway, his expression shifting from annoyance to complete shock when he spotted me. Excuse me, I called out, my voice deliberately small and uncertain. Are you looking for me? Both officers turned, and I watched their professional masks slide into place. Are you Jamie Morrison? The taller one asked. Yes, sir. I kept my eyes downcast, playing the part of a scared teenager. Which, honestly, wasn't much of a stretch since I was absolutely terrified. I heard you asking about me. Where have you been, son? We have a report that you've been missing for 3 weeks. This was it. The moment where everything either worked perfectly or blew up in my face. I glanced past the officers at Richard, whose jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. I've been staying with friends, I said quietly. I tried to come home yesterday, but... I let my voice trail off, stealing a look at Richard. Maybe I should have called first. The genius of this approach was that I wasn't technically lying. I had been staying with friends. I had tried to come back, just not in the way anyone would expect. Jamie, Richard said carefully, and I could hear the warning in his tone. We've been worried sick. Your mother is going to be so relieved. The second officer stepped closer to me. Son, we need to ask you some questions about your living situation. Is this your legal residence? Before I could answer, Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Richard. Of course it is, he said with that easy confidence that came from never having to fight for his place in the world. Jamie's just being dramatic. You know how it is with teenagers. But the officer wasn't looking at Marcus. He was studying Richard's face, and I could see the exact moment he noticed the tension crackling between us. Mr. Blackwood, we're going to need to see those documents we discussed, the officer said. Proof of guardianship, school enrollment papers, medical authorizations. That's all in my wife's files, Richard replied smoothly. She handles the paperwork for the children. And where is your wife currently? Business trip. Germany. She'll be back next week. The officer made a note in his pad. We'll need her contact information. In the meantime, we'd like to speak with Jamie privately. I watched the color drain from Richard's face. This was the scenario he couldn't control, me, alone with police officers, with no witnesses to whatever story I might tell. I don't think that's necessary, Richard said quickly. As you can see, Jamie is fine. This has all been a big misunderstanding. Sir, when a minor goes missing for 3 weeks, we follow protocol. Jamie, would you be comfortable speaking with us alone? My heart hammered as I nodded. Behind the officers, I caught sight of Sophie peeking around the corner, her face pale with worry. She knew as well as I did that this conversation could destroy everything. We can talk in our car, the officer suggested, gesturing toward the street. As we walked away from the house, I felt Richard's eyes burning into my back. He was probably trying to figure out damage control, calculating what I might say and how he could spin it. But Richard didn't know about Tyler's dad calling the station. He didn't know that in about 5 minutes, the police were going to discover I'd been staying at the Henderson house this whole time. Which meant I had exactly 5 minutes to tell a story that would make sense when the truth came out, a story that painted Richard as the villain without revealing that I'd orchestrated this entire confrontation. The officer opened the patrol car door for me, and I slid into the back seat, my mind racing. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. So Jamie, Officer Martinez said as he settled into the driver's seat, turning to face me through the partition. Tell us about these past 3 weeks. Where exactly have you been staying? My mouth went dry. This was the tightrope I had to walk, telling enough truth to be believable while setting up the narrative I needed. With my friend Tyler Henderson and his family, I said, which was completely accurate. They live on Maple Street. Officer Martinez exchanged a look with his partner, Officer Kim, and my stomach dropped. Something in their expressions told me they already knew more than they were letting on. The Henderson family, Officer Kim said slowly. Would that be the same family whose father called our station about 20 minutes ago? Shit. Shit. My carefully constructed timeline was collapsing faster than a house of cards. Yes, probably. Tyler's dad is really protective of me. Protective enough to call us when he realized you'd filed a false missing person report. The words hit me like a physical blow. They knew. They already knew everything, which meant this wasn't an interrogation about Richard's treatment of me, this was about my deception. I was suddenly very aware that I was sitting in the back of a police car like a criminal. It wasn't false, I said quickly, my voice cracking. I really was missing. Just because they knew where I was doesn't mean. Jamie. Officer Martinez's tone was firm but not unkind. Mr. Henderson told us you've been staying with them for 3 weeks with their full knowledge and permission. He said you told them you were taking a break from family stress. That's not the same as being missing. Through the car window, I could see Richard standing in his doorway, arms crossed, watching our conversation with obvious satisfaction. He knew something had gone wrong, I could see it in his smug expression. Marcus and Sophie flanked him like bookends, and for a moment, they looked exactly like the united family I'd never been part of. You don't understand, I said desperately. He kicked me out. Richard told me I had 24 hours to pack my stuff and leave. He changed the locks. He blocked my phone number. What was I supposed to do? Did you try calling your mother? Officer Kim asked. She's in Germany on business. Richard said if I contacted her and ruined her trip, he'd make sure I regretted it. That part was true, he had threatened me about bothering Mom while she was working. But even as I said it, I could see the officers weren't buying it. To them, I looked like a manipulative teenager who'd gotten caught in an elaborate lie. The problem was, I had lied, just not about the important stuff. Here's what's going to happen, Officer Martinez said. We're going to go back to the house and have a conversation with your stepfather. Mr. Henderson is on his way here with documentation proving you've been staying with them voluntarily. After that, we'll need to discuss filing false reports and wasting police resources. My plan hadn't just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. I was about to be exposed as a liar in front of Richard, which would give him all the ammunition he needed when Mom came home. He'd tell her I was so unstable I tried to frame him for kidnapping, and she'd probably agree I needed professional help. Wait, I said as Officer Martinez started to get out of the car. Before we go back there, you need to know something about Richard. He never legally adopted me. Check the records. And ask him about the phone call he made to his accountant 2 months ago about estate planning. Officer Kim paused. What phone call? This was my last shot at salvaging something from this disaster. He told his accountant he specifically didn't adopt me because he wanted to make sure Marcus and Sophie inherited everything without complications from that Morrison kid. He's been acting like my guardian for 2 years without any legal right to do it. That's a serious accusation, Officer Martinez said. Do you have proof of this conversation? It was in his study on a Tuesday night when Mom was in Chicago. Around 9 p.m. He was on speakerphone with someone named Davidson. I was grasping at straws, but the specificity seemed to get their attention. Through the window, I saw a familiar Honda Civic pull up behind the patrol car. Tyler's dad got out, carrying a manila folder, and my heart sank even further. Game over. But then I noticed something else, Richard's confident expression flickering as he watched Mr. Henderson approach. For just a moment, he looked uncertain. Maybe this wasn't over yet. Mr. Henderson's arrival changed the entire dynamic. As he walked toward the patrol car with that manila folder, I noticed Richard's body language shift from smug confidence to something more guarded. But what really caught my attention was the way Tyler's dad nodded grimly at the officers, like he had something important to share beyond just proving I'd been staying at their house. Mr. Henderson, Officer Martinez greeted him. Thank you for coming down. Officers, before we discuss Jamie's living arrangements, there's something you need to see. Mr. Henderson opened his folder, and I craned my neck to glimpse what looked like printed emails. When Jamie mentioned the name Davidson in connection with estate planning, it rang a bell. I handle legal aid cases, and we've had dealings with Davidson and Associates before. My pulse quickened. I had no idea where this was going, but Richard's face had gone pale. What kind of dealings? Officer Kim asked. The kind where wealthy clients try to navigate adoption laws to avoid certain financial obligations, Mr. Henderson said carefully. I made a few calls after your visit. Turns out Richard Blackwood consulted them about the tax implications of not adopting his stepchild. But here's the interesting part, he's been claiming Jamie as a dependent on his tax returns for 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the car window, I watched Richard take a step back from his doorway, his confident posture crumbling. That's potentially fraudulent, Officer Martinez said slowly. Gets worse, Mr. Henderson continued. Jamie's been enrolled in Westfield Academy under Richard's guardianship authorization. The school has his signature on dozens of documents claiming parental responsibility. Medical forms, disciplinary actions, academic decisions, all signed by a man with no legal right to make those choices. I felt like I was watching a chess match where someone had just called checkmate. This wasn't the revenge I'd planned, but it was so much better. Richard hadn't just been emotionally abusive, he'd been breaking actual laws while doing it. Mr. Henderson, Officer Kim said, why didn't Jamie's mother handle these authorizations? According to Jamie, Richard insisted on handling all school matters because his wife traveled frequently for work. The school never questioned it, why would they? He appeared to be the stepfather with full parental rights. Through the windshield, I could see Richard frantically talking to Marcus and Sophie, probably trying to coordinate their stories. But it was too late. The legal implications were already spiraling beyond anything a family conference could fix. There's one more thing, Mr. Henderson said, and his tone made my stomach clench. Jamie, I need you to be honest with the officers about why you really filed that missing person report. My mouth went dry. Tyler's dad knew. Somehow, he'd figured out my entire plan. I know you weren't actually missing, he continued gently. And I suspect you knew exactly what would happen when you called this in. The question is why you felt like this was your only option. Officer Martinez studied my face through the partition. Jamie. Want to explain what's really going on here? I was trapped between my original lie and a truth that might make everything worse. But looking at Richard's panicked expression across the yard, I realized something important. The truth was more damaging to him than any scheme I could have devised. He told me I wasn't his son and never would be, I said quietly. Said he was tired of pretending when Mom wasn't around to put on a show for. He gave me 24 hours to pack and leave, changed the locks, blocked my number. When I tried to come back yesterday, he told me through the door that if I ever contacted my mom about this, he'd make sure she chose him over me. The officers exchanged looks, and I knew they were finally starting to see Richard for what he really was. But Marcus was walking toward our car now, and from his determined expression, I could tell the Blackwood family wasn't going down without a fight. Marcus approached the patrol car with that same calculated confidence he used during student council debates, but I could see the panic flickering behind his eyes. He knocked politely on Officer Martinez's window. Excuse me, officers. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my stepbrother. Officer Kim rolled down the window. How so? Jamie's been struggling with some mental health issues lately, Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake concern. Our family therapist warned us he might act out for attention, especially with Mom being away. Filing false police reports sounds exactly like something Dr. Williams said to watch for. My blood turned to ice. There was no family therapist named Dr. Williams, but Marcus was betting the officers wouldn't verify that immediately. He was trying to paint me as mentally unstable, which would undermine everything I just told them. That's interesting, Mr. Henderson said coldly. Because when I asked Jamie about family counseling last week, he said there wasn't any. Which Dr. Williams would this be? Marcus's smooth facade cracked slightly. Well, it's been confidential. Dad didn't want to worry Jamie by making it seem too serious. So you're receiving therapy about Jamie without Jamie? Officer Martinez asked, his tone sharpening. That's unusual. Through the chaos, I noticed Sophie filming everything with her phone from the front porch. Smart move, she was probably planning to edit the footage to make their family look like victims of police harassment. The Blackwoods were circling the wagons, and they were better at damage control than I'd anticipated. But then Richard made a crucial mistake. He stormed over to our group, his carefully maintained composure finally snapping. This is ridiculous, he barked. Jamie is clearly having some kind of episode. Officers, I'm calling our family attorney. Sir, Officer Kim said firmly, threatening legal action when we're investigating potential fraud and child endangerment isn't helping your case. Child endangerment? Are you insane? I've provided that kid with everything, private school, designer clothes, expensive electronics. More than his real father ever did. The moment those words left his mouth, I saw Mr. Henderson's expression harden. Even the officers looked taken aback by the venom in Richard's voice. Mr. Blackwood, Officer Martinez said slowly, if you've been providing for Jamie as you describe, why wouldn't you want to make that legal through proper adoption? Richard's face flushed red. That's a private family matter. Actually, it's a legal matter, Mr. Henderson interjected. Especially when you're claiming tax benefits and signing school documents for a child you have no legal responsibility for. Sophie had stopped filming and was now tugging on Marcus's sleeve, whispering urgently. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but Marcus's face went pale. Officers, Marcus said quickly, we need to tell you something about those school forms. Richard spun around to face his son. Marcus, don't say another word. Dad, they're going to find out anyway, Sophie called from the porch, her voice cracking. The school keeps everything in their computer system. I had no idea what they were talking about, but Richard looked like he was about to be sick. What about the school forms? Officer Kim pressed. Marcus glanced between his father and the officers, clearly torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Some of Mom's signatures, they might not be. I mean, when she was traveling, Dad would. Marcus. Richard's voice was sharp with warning. But it was too late. Officer Martinez was already reaching for his radio, and Mr. Henderson was flipping through his folder with renewed interest. Dispatch, Officer Martinez spoke into his radio, we need a detective down here, and contact Child Protective Services. We've got a situation that's bigger than a missing person case. As those words crackled through the radio, I realized my small revenge plot had accidentally uncovered something much more serious than emotional abuse. Richard Blackwood wasn't just a terrible stepfather, he was a criminal. The detective arrived within 15 minutes, and I watched from the patrol car as Detective Sarah Chen, a woman who looked like she'd seen every type of family dysfunction imaginable, surveyed the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. Richard had retreated to his front porch, whispering frantically into his phone, probably with his lawyer. Marcus and Sophie huddled together like scared children, which honestly felt like poetic justice. Jamie, Detective Chen said as she approached the car, I'm going to need you to walk me through everything that's happened over the past few weeks. And I mean everything, including the parts you might not be proud of. I took a shaky breath. I filed that missing person report because I wanted to get back at Richard for kicking me out. I thought if the police showed up asking questions, it would embarrass him and maybe force him to let me come home. The admission felt like swallowing glass. I didn't know about the tax stuff or the school forms or any of that. But you did know he never legally adopted you? Yeah. I overheard him talking to his accountant about it months ago. He said he didn't want to complicate his estate planning with that Morrison kid. Detective Chen made notes while Mr. Henderson pulled out more documents from his folder. Detective, I've been making calls since this morning, he said. Richard Blackwood has been forging his wife's signature on school documents for over a year. The school secretary mentioned it when I asked about enrollment procedures. She said Mrs. Blackwood's signature looked different on recent forms, but they assumed it was just inconsistent handwriting. My stomach dropped. Wait, he's been forging Mom's signature. Gets worse, Detective Chen said grimly. We ran a preliminary check on his tax filings. He's been claiming you as a dependent and receiving benefits for supporting a minor child, but legally, he has no more right to claim you than any random stranger. Across the yard, Richard's phone conversation was getting heated. I could see him gesturing angrily, his face red with frustration. Whatever his lawyer was telling him, he clearly didn't like it. There's something else, Sophie called out suddenly, her voice shaking. She was walking toward us with her phone in her hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Richard spun around. Sophie, get back in the house right now. No, she shouted, her voice cracking. I'm tired of lying for you. She held up her phone to Detective Chen. I have recordings. Dad made us practice what to say if anyone ever asked questions about Jamie. He said if child services or the school ever investigated, we needed to make it look like Mom was handling everything. Marcus grabbed Sophie's arm. Soph, what are you doing? The right thing. She yanked away from him. Detective, my dad has been lying to everyone for 2 years. He made fake email accounts to correspond with the school using Mom's name. He has a whole system for making it look like she's involved in Jamie's life when she's traveling. The color drained from Richard's face as he ended his phone call and marched toward us. Sophie, you don't understand the consequences of what you're saying. I understand that Jamie tried to kill himself last month, Sophie said, and my blood turned to ice. Sophie, no, I whispered, but she kept talking. You weren't at Tyler's house the whole time, were you? She said, turning to me with tears in her eyes. Marcus saw you sleeping in the park 2 weeks ago. We knew you were homeless and Dad wouldn't let us help you. Detective Chen's expression hardened as she looked between Sophie and Richard. Mr. Blackwood, you knew this child was living on the streets. That's not, she's exaggerating, Richard stammered, but his lawyer-coached confidence was completely gone now. I have pictures, Marcus said quietly, pulling out his own phone. I took them because I thought maybe I could convince Dad to let him come back if I showed him how bad it was. The photos on Marcus's screen made my chest tight with humiliation. There I was, sleeping on a park bench, digging through a McDonald's dumpster, washing my clothes in a gas station bathroom sink. Pictures from the week when Tyler's family was out of town and I'd been too proud to ask other friends for help. Detective Chen studied the photos with a grim expression. When were these taken? Last Tuesday and Wednesday, Marcus said. Jamie, I'm sorry. I should have done something sooner. The irony wasn't lost on me. My elaborate revenge scheme had been completely unnecessary. The truth was so much worse than anything I could have made up. And judging by the handcuffs Detective Chen was pulling from her belt, Richard was about to learn it the hard way. The handcuffs clicked shut around Richard's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire neighborhood. I watched from the patrol car as Detective Chen read him his Miranda rights, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for tax fraud, forgery, and child endangerment, she said in that flat, professional tone cops use when they've seen too much. This is insane. Richard shouted, struggling against the cuffs. I've done nothing but provide for that ungrateful kid. Ask anyone in this neighborhood, ask his teachers, I've been a model father. Model fathers don't forge legal documents, Detective Chen replied. Model fathers don't let 16-year-olds sleep in parks. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who'd unknowingly become my witness, had emerged from her house across the street, her Pomeranian tucked under one arm while she openly stared at the spectacle. Other neighbors were starting to gather too, drawn by the police cars and the shouting. Richard's reputation in this pristine neighborhood was crumbling in real time. Sophie was sobbing now, clinging to Marcus like he was the only solid thing in her collapsing world. Jamie, I'm so sorry, she kept repeating. We knew it was wrong, but Dad said if we didn't stick together, the family would fall apart and Mom would leave. The family was falling apart anyway, I wanted to tell her. It had been broken long before I ever filed that police report. But then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. Detective, there's something else you need to know. About Mom. Detective Chen paused in escorting Richard to her unmarked car. What about her? She's not really on a business trip in Germany, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been at Grandma's house in Oregon for the past month. Dad told us to lie about it because he said if anyone knew she'd left him, it would raise questions about Jamie's situation. The bottom dropped out of my world. Mom wasn't in Germany. She'd been 3 hours away this entire time while I was sleeping in parks and eating out of dumpsters. She'd left Richard, which meant she knew something was seriously wrong, and she'd abandoned me anyway. Oregon. I croaked, my voice coming out strangled. She's been in Oregon. Sophie nodded miserably. Grandma Peterson's house in Portland. She and Dad had a huge fight about you right before she left. She said she couldn't stand watching what was happening to you anymore, but Dad convinced her that taking you away from the family would ruin your stability. So she just left me here. The betrayal hit harder than anything Richard had ever done to me. All those times I told myself that Mom would fix everything if she just knew the truth, all those moments I protected her from Richard's worst behavior because I thought she was innocent, it had all been a lie. Detective Chen was studying my face with obvious concern. Jamie, did you know your mother had separated from Mr. Blackwood? I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. Mr. Henderson moved closer to the car window, his expression a mixture of anger and pity. We're going to get this sorted out, Detective Chin said firmly. But first, we need to contact your mother and get her back here immediately. A minor can't be left in this kind of legal limbo. Richard's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who'd arrived during the arrest, was already on his phone, probably doing damage control. But as I watched Richard being loaded into the detective's car, still protesting his innocence, I realized something that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. I'd won. My ridiculous revenge plot had worked better than I'd ever dreamed possible. Richard was facing serious criminal charges, his reputation was destroyed, and the truth about our toxic family dynamic was finally out in the open. So why did victory feel so much like losing everything? The Child Protective Services worker arrived just as they were loading Richard into Detective Chen's car, and I watched this stranger who would determine my immediate future survey the chaos with practiced efficiency. Sarah Mitchell looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, clipboard in hand and that weary expression social workers get after seeing too many broken families. Jamie Morrison, she asked, approaching the patrol car. I'm going to need to speak with you about temporary placement while we sort this situation out. Temporary placement. The words hit me like ice water. With Richard arrested and Mom apparently hiding out in Oregon, I was officially a ward of the state, exactly the nightmare scenario every foster kid warns you about. Can't he stay with us? Mr. Henderson interjected. He's been living at our house anyway, and my wife's already attached to him. Ms. Mitchell shook her head. I appreciate the offer, but there are protocols. We need official kinship placements or licensed foster homes, especially given the criminal charges involved. Marcus suddenly stepped forward, his face pale but determined. What about our Aunt Rebecca? Dad's sister in Seattle. She's always been close to Jamie. I stared at him in shock. Rebecca Blackwood had visited maybe 3 times in 2 years, and each visit had been awkward small talk over dinner. But more importantly, Marcus was trying to help me, the same stepbrother who'd spent months participating in my emotional exile. Marcus, shut up, Sophie hissed, but her heart wasn't in it. She looked as lost as I felt. Ms. Mitchell made notes on her clipboard. We'd need to verify that relationship and run background checks. In the meantime, Jamie needs immediate temporary care. That's when Detective Chen's phone rang with what was clearly important news. I watched her face change as she listened, her expression growing darker with each passing second. That was the Portland Police Department, she announced after ending the call. Mrs. Morrison's mother confirms that her daughter has been staying there, but she says Mrs. Morrison left 2 days ago. Apparently, she's driving back here because she heard about some kind of family emergency. My stomach dropped. What family emergency? Detective Chen's expression was grim. Someone contacted her claiming there had been an accident involving you. She's been driving straight through from Oregon, expecting to find you in the hospital. The implications hit me like a freight train. Richard must have called Mom and lied about why the police were at the house. While he was being arrested for fraud and child endangerment, he'd somehow managed to spin this as me being the problem, again. She's going to think this is all my fault, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jamie, no, Sophie said quickly. She's going to see Dad in handcuffs and figure out the truth. But Marcus was shaking his head. You don't know Mom like we do. Dad's really good at making her believe his version of things. Remember when Sophie got caught shoplifting and he convinced Mom it was peer pressure from her art class friends? MS. Mitchell looked between all of us with growing concern. How long until Mrs. Morrison arrives? She was in Northern California when she called Grandma, Detective Chin said. Maybe 6 hours if she's been driving all night. 6 hours to prepare for a conversation that would determine whether I had any family left at all. 6 hours while Mom drove through the night believing whatever story Richard had fed her about why her son was supposedly dying in a hospital. But then Tyler's Honda pulled up to the curb, and I saw something that gave me the first spark of hope I'd felt all day. Tyler wasn't alone, his mom was with him, and she was carrying what looked like a casserole dish. Oh honey, Mrs. Henderson said as she approached our group, completely ignoring the police cars and official chaos. I brought dinner. I figured everyone would be hungry after all this mess. It was such a perfectly normal, maternal response to crisis that I almost started crying. Here was this woman treating a fraud investigation and arrest like any other family emergency that required comfort food and practical care. Ms. Mitchell stared at the casserole dish like she'd never seen anything quite like it. Ma'am, this is an official investigation. Which means these children haven't eaten properly all day, Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. Jamie, sweetie, you look terrible. When's the last time you had a real meal? Before I could answer, Detective Chen's radio crackled with another update that made everyone freeze. Detective Chen, we've got a situation. Mrs. Morrison just called 911 from a rest stop. She says someone's been following her car since Sacramento. The words, someone's been following her, sent ice through my veins. Detective Chen was already coordinating with dispatch, her radio crackling with urgent cross-chatter about highway patrol and vehicle descriptions. But all I could think about was Mom, alone on some dark freeway, scared and running toward what she thought was her dying son. Could be Richard's associates, Mr. Henderson said grimly. If he's been running financial schemes for years, there might be other people with stakes in keeping this quiet. Ms. Mitchell looked like she was reconsidering her entire approach to my case. Detective, we need to get this child somewhere secure immediately. If there are outside parties involved. Nobody's following Mom, Marcus interrupted, his face flushed with what looked like guilt. It's probably just Trevor. Detective Chen spun around. Who's Trevor? Sophie buried her face in her hands. Oh God, Marcus, you didn't. Who is Trevor? Detective Chen repeated, her voice sharp with authority. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Trevor Michaels. He was supposed to be our insurance policy. Dad hired him last month when he thought Mom might try to take Jamie and leave. The revelation hit the group like a bomb. Mrs. Henderson actually took a step back, clutching her casserole dish tighter. You hired someone to follow a woman and child. Not follow, Marcus said quickly. Just monitor. Dad said if Mom tried to run away with Jamie, we needed to know where they went so we could bring them back safely. That's called stalking, Detective Chen said coldly, already reaching for her radio again. And possibly kidnapping conspiracy. My head was spinning. Richard hadn't just been emotionally abusive and financially fraudulent, he'd been planning to have Mom and me tracked if we tried to escape. The scope of his control was so much bigger than I'd ever imagined. Marcus, what exactly did your father tell this Trevor person to do? Detective Chin pressed. Just keep tabs on Mom's location and report back. But when she left for Oregon, Dad told Trevor to back off because she wasn't taking Jamie with her. Marcus's voice was getting smaller with each word. I swear we didn't know he was still watching her. Sophie looked up from her hands, tears streaming down her face. Trevor's been sending Dad updates this whole time. Photos of where Mom was staying, what car she was driving, even what hotels she stopped at. I saw the texts on Dad's phone. The systematic nature of Richard's surveillance made my skin crawl. He turned my mother into a target, probably planning to use her location against her somehow when she finally tried to come home. This Trevor, Detective Chin said, does he know about today's events? About the arrest? Marcus and Sophie exchanged looks that told me everything I needed to know. Dad texted him right before you put him in handcuffs, Sophie whispered. He told Trevor that Jamie was having a psychiatric emergency and Mom needed to be guided home safely without any outside interference. My blood turned to ice. What does that mean, exactly? It means, Detective Chin said grimly, this Trevor person thinks he's protecting your mother from a mentally unstable child who's caused a family crisis. He doesn't know about the arrest or the fraud charges. Mrs. Henderson set down her casserole dish with shaking hands. That poor woman thinks she's racing to her son's bedside, and some stranger is following her based on lies. Detective Chin was already coordinating with Highway Patrol, but I could see the concern in her expression. Mom was 6 hours away on a dark highway, being stalked by someone who thought I was the problem, rushing toward a home situation that no longer existed. And there was absolutely nothing I could do to warn her. The next update from Highway Patrol made everyone's blood run cold. Detective Chen, we've got eyes on both vehicles. The subject following Mrs. Morrison appears to be trying to force her off at the next exit. My world tilted sideways. He's trying to make her pull over. Detective Chen was barking orders into her radio about roadblocks and backup units, but all I could hear was the roaring in my ears. Trevor wasn't just following Mom anymore, he was actively intercepting her, probably thinking he was helping, based on Richard's lies about my supposed psychiatric emergency. This is my fault, I said, the words tumbling out. If I hadn't filed that stupid missing person report. No, Mrs. Henderson said firmly, abandoning her casserole to grab my shoulders through the car window. This is not your fault. This is what happens when adults make terrible choices and drag children into their mess. But Marcus was shaking his head, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. I can fix this. I have Trevor's number. I can tell him the truth about Dad. Absolutely not, Detective Chin snapped. You contact this person and warn him about police involvement, you become an accessory. Nobody makes any calls. Sophie was crying harder now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Jamie, I'm so sorry. We knew Dad was getting weird about tracking Mom, but we thought it was just because he was scared of losing the house in a divorce. The house? Ms. Mitchell looked up from her paperwork with sharp interest. It's in Mom's name, Marcus admitted. Dad's been freaking out because if she divorces him and takes Jamie, he loses everything. The house, the cars, even some of his business assets are tied to their joint accounts. A new picture was forming, and it was so much uglier than simple emotional abuse. Richard hadn't just been cruel, he'd been systematically trapping Mom in their marriage using me as leverage. Every time she tried to protect me, he'd found ways to make the cost too high for her to pay. That's why he never adopted Jamie legally, Mr. Henderson said, connecting the dots. If he had no legal claim to the child, he couldn't be held responsible for abandonment. But he could still use Jamie's presence to manipulate his wife into staying. The sophisticated cruelty of it made me nauseous. Richard had engineered a situation where Mom couldn't leave without abandoning me, but couldn't take me without destroying both our financial security. No wonder she cracked under the pressure and fled to Oregon. Detective Chen's radio crackled again, units in position. We're going to attempt contact with Mrs. Morrison's vehicle first, let her know she's safe to continue driving. Through the static, I heard a voice that made my chest tight, this is Mrs. Morrison. I don't understand what's happening. This man keeps flashing his lights at me and pointing at the exit. I think something's wrong with my car. Ma'am, do not pull over, the highway patrol officer replied. Continue driving to the next major exit where our units are waiting. The person following you is not law enforcement. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Mom's voice again, higher and scared, are you telling me I'm being followed? Is this about Jamie? Is my son alright? I wanted to grab the radio and tell her everything, that I was fine, that Richard was the one in handcuffs, that she didn't need to feel guilty anymore about leaving me. But I was just a passenger in this disaster, watching my family implode from the back of a police car. Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay on this channel and keep driving, the officer said. We'll have everything sorted out very soon. Detective Chen looked at her watch, then at me. Jamie, your mother's going to be here in about 4 hours. When she arrives, there's going to be a lot to explain. You need to decide what story you want to tell her. What story I wanted to tell her. As if there were multiple versions of the truth to choose from, instead of one complicated mess where everybody was wrong and nobody was entirely innocent. But the biggest question wasn't what I'd tell Mom when she got here. It was whether she'd still want to be my mother after she learned what I'd done. The highway patrol finally intercepted Trevor 40 minutes later, but by then the damage was done. Mom had been terrorized for hours by someone she thought was either trying to help her son or hurt her, she wasn't sure which was worse. Detective Chin kept us updated through radio chatter, and I could hear the exhaustion in Mom's voice when she finally spoke to the officers. I just want to see my son, she kept repeating. Please, I just need to know Jamie's okay. What none of us expected was Trevor's reaction when highway patrol pulled him over. Instead of the confused hired investigator we'd imagined, he turned out to be Richard's business partner, and he'd been embezzling from their shared accounts for months. Detective Chen, the highway patrol sergeant reported through radio static, this guy's got a briefcase full of falsified loan documents and what looks like evidence of systematic fraud going back 2 years. He says Blackwood's been cooking the books to hide assets from his wife. I watched Detective Chen's expression shift from concern to grim satisfaction. That explains the surveillance. He wasn't just tracking Mrs. Morrison for custody reasons, he was making sure she couldn't access evidence of financial crimes. Ms. Mitchell looked up from her paperwork, clearly out of her depth. So this isn't just about an unstable family situation. This is about organized financial fraud with multiple conspirators, Detective Chen replied. Which means Jamie's safety concerns were more valid than anyone realized. The revelation should have felt like vindication, but instead I felt hollow. Every adult in my life had been lying about something. Richard was a criminal, Mom had abandoned me to hide from problems she couldn't face, and even Trevor, who I'd thought was just some private investigator, had been stealing money while helping to terrorize our family. Marcus sat down heavily on the front steps, his head in his hands. Jamie, I'm sorry. We knew Dad was getting desperate about money, but we thought it was just normal divorce stress. Define normal, Mrs. Henderson said sharply. She'd been getting progressively more angry as each new revelation emerged, and now she looked like she wanted to shake someone. Normal people don't hire criminals to stalk their wives. Sophie was scrolling through her phone with a strange expression. There's more, she said quietly. I've been going through Dad's text messages, the ones he made us delete from our phones but forgot to clear from his iPad. Detective Chen moved closer. What kind of messages? Messages about Jamie's college fund, Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad emptied it 6 months ago to cover business losses. That's why he was so freaked about Mom leaving, she was going to find out about the missing money when it came time for applications. The words hit me like a physical blow. My college fund, the money Mom had been contributing to since I was 8 years old, the nest egg that was supposed to give me options after high school, was gone. Richard had stolen my future to cover his own mistakes. How much? I managed to ask. $43,000, Sophie read from the screen. He transferred it to something called Blackwood Holdings to avoid bankruptcy. Mrs. Henderson made a sound like she was choking on her own rage. That monster didn't just steal from the IRS, he stole from a child. Detective Chen was already on her radio again, coordinating with white-collar crime specialists. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about all those times Richard had lectured me about being grateful for opportunities and understanding the value of hard work. He'd been spending my college money while telling me I should be thankful for his generosity. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Dude, my dad says the FBI is getting involved. Are you okay? The FBI. My stupid revenge plot had somehow triggered a federal investigation. What started as me wanting to embarrass Richard for being a terrible stepfather had uncovered a criminal enterprise that apparently stretched across state lines and involved multiple victims. I was 16 years old, sitting in the back of a police car, watching my entire world collapse, and somehow I was the one person in this mess who hadn't actually committed any real crimes. Mom was still 3 hours away, racing toward a home that no longer existed to save a son who'd accidentally destroyed everything while trying to save himself. The FBI van pulled up just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across what used to be my quiet suburban street. Agent Catherine Walsh looked like she'd stepped out of a crime drama, sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made everyone suddenly stand straighter. Detective Chen. Agent Walsh approached our group with a tablet in hand. We need to discuss the Blackwood Financial Network. This goes much deeper than tax fraud. I watched from the patrol car as she spread documents across the hood of Detective Chen's vehicle. Even from a distance, I could see charts and financial records that looked way more complicated than anything a car dealership should need. Jamie, Ms. Mitchell said, sliding into the seat next to me, I need to prepare you for what's coming. When your mother arrives, she's not just going to be dealing with family drama, she's going to be a witness in a federal investigation. My stomach clenched. What does that mean? It means your family's finances are going to be scrutinized by federal agents. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments, property, everything will be frozen until they can determine what's legitimate and what's proceeds from criminal activity. The implications hit me like ice water. The house? Potentially seized as evidence, Ms. Mitchell said gently. Along with the cars, any expensive belongings, even your mother's personal accounts if they're connected to the fraud. I stared out the window at the house I'd been so desperate to get back into just hours ago. The irony was brutal. I'd finally won my war against Richard, but victory meant losing the only home I'd known for the past 2 years. Marcus was crying now, the reality sinking in as he watched FBI agents photographing his BMW. Sophie sat on the front steps looking shell-shocked, probably realizing that her phone full of designer shopping trips was evidence of money laundering. There's something else, Agent Walsh was saying to Detective Chen, her voice carrying across the driveway. We found evidence that Blackwood's been running this scheme in other states. He's got stepchildren in Nevada and Arizona who've been used as tax write-offs while he diverted their support payments. Other stepchildren. Other kids like me, scattered across the country, probably having no idea they were pawns in Richard's financial games. The scope of his manipulation was staggering. My phone rang, making everyone jump. Mom's name flashed on the screen. Should I answer it? I asked Detective Chen. She nodded grimly. Keep it brief. Don't mention the FBI yet. Jamie? Mom's voice was raw with exhaustion and panic. Baby, are you okay? The police said there was no hospital emergency, but I don't understand what's happening. I'm okay, Mom, I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm safe. But when you get here, things are going to be complicated. Complicated how? Jamie, you're scaring me. Where's Richard? Why won't anyone explain what's going on? Agent Walsh was gesturing for Detective Chen to end the call. Apparently there were protocols about family contact during federal investigations. Mom, just drive carefully and come straight to the house, I said quickly. Don't stop anywhere else, don't call Richard, and don't worry about me. I'll explain everything when you get here. Jamie. I love you, Mom. Everything's going to be okay. I hung up before she could ask more questions I couldn't answer. Agent Walsh approached the patrol car, her expression serious. Jamie, I need you to understand something. When your mother arrives, she's going to be questioned about her knowledge of her husband's activities. Depending on her answers, she could be considered either a victim or a potential accomplice. The words made my blood freeze. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and manipulation and betrayal, there was still a chance Mom could be arrested too. And there was absolutely nothing I could do to protect her. Mom's headlights swept across the FBI van as she pulled into our driveway at 11:47 p.m., and I watched through the patrol car window as she sat frozen behind the wheel, staring at the chaos that used to be her perfectly ordered life. Agent Walsh approached her car while Detective Chin gestured for me to finally get out and face the reckoning I'd been dreading for hours. Jamie. Mom's voice cracked as she stumbled out of her Honda, and despite everything, despite the lies and the abandonment and a federal investigation, I ran straight into her arms like I was 8 years old again. I'm sorry, I sobbed into her shoulder. Mom, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to come home. She held me tight, and I could feel her shaking. Baby, what happened? Why are there FBI agents in our driveway? Where's Richard? Agent Walsh cleared her throat diplomatically. Mrs. Morrison, we need to discuss your husband's business activities. And your son's role in helping us uncover them. Over the next hour, sitting in our living room that was now an active crime scene, Mom learned the truth about everything. The tax fraud, the forged signatures, the surveillance, the stolen college fund, Trevor's arrest, and the network of financial crimes that stretched across multiple states. Agent Walsh laid it out methodically while Mom's face cycled through disbelief, horror, and finally, a cold anger I'd never seen before. $43,000, Mom repeated, her voice deadly quiet. He stole Jamie's college fund. Among other things, Detective Chin confirmed. Mrs. Morrison, we need to know, did you have any knowledge of these financial irregularities? I knew something was wrong, Mom said, her hands clenched in her lap. That's why I left for Oregon. Richard kept making excuses for why I couldn't access our joint accounts, why Jamie's school forms looked different, why there were always complications when I tried to be more involved in family finances. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. But I thought it was just control issues, not actual crimes. Agent Walsh nodded. Based on our investigation, we believe you were deliberately kept in the dark. You're being classified as a victim, not an accomplice. The relief on Mom's face was overwhelming. But then she turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. Jamie, sweetheart, I need you to explain why you filed that missing person report. This was it. The moment where I had to admit that my elaborate revenge plot had accidentally exposed a federal crime ring. I took a shaky breath and told her everything, the emotional abuse, the threats, sleeping in the park, staying with Tyler's family, and my desperate plan to embarrass Richard into letting me come home. You were homeless, Mom whispered, her voice breaking. My baby was sleeping in parks while I was hiding at Grandma's house feeling sorry for myself. Mom, it's not your fault. It is my fault, she said firmly. I knew Richard was toxic, but I was so scared of being a single mother again, so afraid of losing financial security, that I convinced myself things would get better. She cupped my face in her hands. I failed you, Jamie. I'm supposed to protect you, and instead I left you to deal with that monster alone. 6 months later, Richard was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The house was seized, but the FBI helped us recover most of my college fund from hidden accounts. Marcus and Sophie went to live with their aunt in Seattle, we exchange occasional texts, and they're doing better in therapy. Mom and I found a small apartment across town, and honestly, it's the happiest I've been in years. No more walking on eggshells, no more family dinners full of silent hostility, no more wondering if I belong somewhere. The best part? Mrs. Henderson still brings us casseroles every Sunday, because some people understand that family isn't about blood or legal documents, it's about who shows up when your world falls apart. Richard thought he could make me disappear by erasing my place in his perfect family. Instead, I accidentally made him disappear from ours. Turns out the best revenge really is living well.